makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London with the conversations that matter, and here's what's coming up on today's program. Bloomberg learns that ASML and TSMC have ways to disable the world's most sophisticated chip-making machines in the event that China invades Taiwan. We'll bring you our scoop. Europe is divided over a request by the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants for Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu and the country's defense minister on war crime charges. Plus, JPMorgan boss Jamie Dimon ignites succession talk at America's biggest bank, signaling his retirement is closer than ever. We did hear that for quite some years, and he still says that there's a lot of energy. Speaking of energy, let's have a look at what the markets are telling us. Now, we're seeing a little bit of stocks actually slipping across the board, so they're opening a little bit weaker, again, pulling back some of the recent record highs. Investors really retreating to the sidelines to wait for results from Nvidia. Will we see that AI rally continuing? Now, this is a bellwether, Nvidia, for the artificial intelligence frenzy over the past year, which, of course, has powered a large chunk of the S&P 500's earnings. Bond yields also broadly easing. Again, this is on a view that the Fed and other major central banks are on track to cut interest rates this year. And then you see gold at 2,419. And we always look at copper because it's above 10,000. So a lot of people have to take a double take at 10,000, still at a record high. So back to our big story of the day. Bloomberg has learned that ASML and TSMC have ways to disable the world's most sophisticated chip-making machines should China invade Taiwan. Now, we're joined by Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie, who has all of the details. Tom, I mean, This is a huge piece of news. This is through really months of Bloomberg trying to figure out exactly what was going on. What have we learned from the scoop? Yeah,
absolutely. Painstaking reporting from the teams in the Netherlands and the US as well, confirming this. So essentially, this is a kill switch that would be applied to these ASML machines, these extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that process and produce and are essential to the production of the most sophisticated chips that TSMC, that makes the biggest foundries over in Taiwan, is dependent on. And TSMC is the biggest buyer of these EUVs that are made and produced by ASML. Essentially, they can remotely shut down these machines in the event of a, for example, invasion of China by Taiwan. This coming out as a result of pressure from the US, concerns amongst US officials that should China invade Taiwan, they might get access to these highly sophisticated machines and be able to push up in terms of their production abilities. The Netherlands has been, by the way, gaming out what would happen and testing out the risk scenarios in that kind of event. And again, ASML, TSMC assuring these officials in the US that they have this ability to remotely shut down these machines.
I mean, the remote, shut off really feels like a bit of a James Bond film. What does it mean for US-China relations?
Yeah, I mean, these are highly sophisticated machines. They're made up of thousands of different components. You actually need engineers in these clean rooms in the spaces where they operate to check in on them every couple of months anyway. If one component goes missing or needs to be upgraded, that's a problem for the machine. Now they have this ability, they say, to remotely shut them down. It points really to the urgency with which the US is looking at this as a risk factor. It underscores just how concerned they are about China getting hold of these most sophisticated machines. China already has access to some of the older ultraviolet lithography machines, and we've seen Huawei being able to produce very sophisticated chips for their smartphones. The concern for US officials is that not so much the smartphone industry, it's whether those chips end up in the sophisticated missile systems of China and the PLA, and clearly that's where their focus is in. Some US officials, by the way, generals within the military in the US, have suggested that China could be prepared to invade Taiwan by 2027. So clearly there is urgency behind this.
But, Tom, I mean, does this come from the US side? We also know that the company is expecting as much as 15% of the year's sales to China will be affected by the latest kind of tight chip, right, on some of these expert controls.
China is still a major market for ASML. They are still able to sell into the Chinese market a number of their legacy ASML machines, lithography machines, but not the most cutting-edge extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. But by the way, ASML is the only producer of in the world. They're the only company that makes these. They were banned from selling those last year. And you're right, it's not just the US. Washington's managed to persuade the Netherlands and Japan to get on board with some of these restrictions as well.
Okay, we'll see if there's any retaliation, or we'll see what China says in response. Tom, thank you so much. As always, Tom McKenzie there with the very latest on these chip-making, pretty extraordinary story, actually, chip-making scoop scoop coming from our team all over the world. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden has defended Israel against war crime charges sought by the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor. Now, the prosecutor says he's seeking arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Now, the move has also divided European leaders. The U.S. president has called the court's decision to target Israel's leaders dangerous.
We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas.
Well, let's bring in Bloomberg's EMEA news director, Roz Matheson. Roz, when the news broke, I wasn't sure really what to make of it. I mean, is this Joe Biden then trying to give Benjamin Netanyahu support? Is he really going to be arrested, or is this just politics?
Well, there's actually some steps to go yet. This is the prosecutor saying that he's going to seek approval to get these arrest warrants issued against both the leader of Hamas and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and also some senior officials in Israel as well. And so there's going to be a period of time where that gets considered. We don't know what that final decision is going to be, but certainly the prosecutor has made the case for it. And it's a very sensitive issue, obviously, for Israel, because normally the kinds of leaders who have arrest warrants issued, you're in the realm of Russian President Vladimir Putin for his invasion of Ukraine, certain African leaders over time. And the sense is, are you now, is this a sense of equivalence, really, with Israel, Hamas and Vladimir Putin? And, there's a lot of concern already around the trajectory of Israel's war in Gaza, and certainly some of the humanitarian questions. And it just adds to that sense that Israel's under pressure globally over its actions inside Gaza. But, the precedents, the idea of putting Benjamin Netanyahu under an arrest warrant obviously has the US and others concerned. Does it torpedo efforts for a ceasefire completely? Does it just lead Israel to say, well, fine, we're just going to go into Rafah then either way? Does it, in a way, harden support further around Netanyahu at home? We've seen fractures in his war cabinet just in recent days, but is that idea of, well, we can criticise each other, but we can't be criticised from the outside. So do you see that kind of coalescing of support inside Israel now around Netanyahu as a result?
So what do you think it does? I mean, again, there are so many questions, but does it actually slow down? There's been public outcry about the number of civilian casualties. If the incursion into Rafah continues, does this slow that down?
Well, it seems like they're on a pretty slow walk anyway at the moment. It really is that kind of creeping offensive in Rafah, not the full-bore thing we thought might come, and that may still come at some point. But they do tend to be going pretty carefully at this point, aware a little at least of some of the criticism that they've been getting from overseas. But of course, Israel's not actually a signatory to this court, and neither is the US. So in a way, even if the arrest warrant does come, it's pretty symbolic. He's not about to get arrested by anybody. If he did travel to a country that is a signatory, there would be that awkward question of what do they do about that? Do they somehow have to find a way to not arrest him? But it's really kind of theoretical in a way. It's more sending a symbolic signal of concern about the war. So the question is, how much does Israel take that on board? Do they slow down further what they're doing in Rafah? But it seems to be on a pretty slow walk already, regardless of that.
And Ross, yesterday we were talking about a possible power vacuum, actually, in Iran after the death of the president in that helicopter crash. Like 48 hours later, where are we?
Well, we're obviously going to an election in June. As expected, within 50 days, they've got to hold that vote. We know that we've got an interim president at the moment. The question is, does he become the lead candidate for the administration into election? Do they allow a pseudo-reformist candidate to run to try and get turnout? Because, of course, in the last election, the turnout was very, very low. Do they kind of allow the sense of a competition, even though really it's a very tightly managed process, to try and encourage people out to vote? But the real question, the longer term, is not so much the election, it's the longer term succession for the Supreme Leader Khamenei. What happens to him? Because, of course, President Raisi was seen as one candidate to succeed him, and now it's really, the Supreme Ruler's son who's the sole candidate. And that raises all sorts of awkward questions for Iran. So the longer-term question is really the big one for Iran and where it goes from here in terms of domestically and in the region and beyond. And that's the question of who would be the supreme leader.
And Roz, we're just looking at live pictures actually of Tabriz in Iran with the live pictures of the funeral of Iran's late president, which is now underway. Is it going to be the same kind of hardliner that would take over both the Ayatollah and then the president when the Ayatollah goes?
Very much so. That's that sense of, again, continuity and control from the very top, because the president has some powers but is largely ceremonial. I mean, an actor really of the agenda of their boss, and the boss is the supreme leader. So you want to see that sort of continuity and control for Iran. Will be interesting to see. We're seeing, obviously, this footage showing large outpourings of grief, of mourning, the burial, the funeral that's going on, the footage of people gathering. But, there's also, a sense, no doubt, amongst some in Iran, like, Raisi was not a popular figure, and the question is, does this allow any room for dissent to bubble up? The only way you're probably going to see that is that people will not turn out to vote. It'll be a silent protest versus masses coming out into the street. So you might see some of that come in when on election days that people simply just don't turn out to vote.
Ross, thank you so much, as always, for some great insight. Our Bloomberg EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson. Now, plenty more to come. Investors, of course, waiting on this week's results from Nvidia for the latest gauge of the AI rally. We'll talk about that next, and this is Bloomberg.
I was on the record before saying I was at the median, which was 3. The developments I've seen in the economy right now, I would not think that that's still appropriate because the inflation risks have moved up. It's too soon to tell what path inflation's on, so we just need to collect more information on that. In the first part of the year, what we saw was the risks that we were too restrictive have gone down. Last year people were worried about, the Fed may be getting too restrictive and therefore it's going to dampen the economy. Those risks went down. At the same time, the risks to inflation, I think, are tilted to the upside and remain so. And so that's the balancing that we have to do as we set policy going forward.
I do think that our new steady state is likely to be higher than what people have known over the last decade, maybe back to where we were in the 1990s and 2000s, but we'll just have to see. Anything can happen. My outlook is really that inflation will continue to fall through this year and into 2025. I think that it will take quite a while for us to get all the way to 2%, but I do think we'll get there.
The Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic, Cleveland's Loretta Mester, there speaking exclusively to Bloomberg. Now let's bring in Grace Peters, Global Head of Investment Strategy at JPMorgan Private Bank. Grace, thank you so much for coming on. I love listening, of course, to these, minutiae details about what they're expecting and inflation, because we used to support sports team. Now it's all about, what happens to inflation. Yeah. There's like a international obsession. And I don't know whether it's just harder to understand what the Fed does next than it was like 5 years ago.
Good morning. It definitely feels like there's an obsession with the Fed's next cut. And of course it's important because it tells us so much around the growth and inflation mix that exists in the economy. I would say by overly focusing on it, investors run the risk of missing out. If we just think about the huge change in market pricing that we've seen over the last 10 months or so, from at 1.6 cuts being priced for this year now to around 2, who would have thought that the equity market now sits at 5,300? So if you'd focused too much on, whether it's 5, 4, 3, you could miss out on the equity rally. And so that's very much our position. We believe that, there is still disinflation in the system, that growth is slowing, and some of the April data has really supported that, but still to a healthy level. We think that the central banks can cut, that probably it will be the ECB and the Bank of England before the Fed, but that's a healthy environment for risk, and there's so much going on below the surface in Q1 earnings, as an example, that we should be dedicating more time to rather than just central bank speculation.
Yeah, and I don't know whether I would go as far as call it like an unhealthy obsession, but the economy in the U.S. is definitely slowing. And so it's unclear whether when the Fed cuts, this is in a slowdown or actually a down, or because inflation is under control. And that changes the dynamic of future cuts as well.
It does. And I think when it comes to investing, therefore, you can't assume there's only one path forward. You have to look at the tail risks. And one of those tail risks would be a re-acceleration in inflation. we'd assign around a 20% probability to that. And as you say, an equal probability to the fact that growth slows more. We've seen US GDP slow from around 5%, in the fourth quarter of last year to around 2.2, 2.5, we think, for the second quarter of this year. We think that will trend to around 2%, but, a 20% probability that actually it goes lower than that and that we end in the recession that everybody believed in, a year ago. But that still leaves our central case, 60%, being that we do see continued economic and corporate growth, which is constructive for us.
So what does that mean for earnings per share? Again, forecasts for earnings per shares have only but increased.
Yes.
And also a lot of the focus on margins. Are you still constructive on equities?
We are. So we've been constructive on equities all year, which felt lonely a few months ago. But I think, there's been a huge change in sentiment over the last few months. But I think the focus is now going to start turning to, 12 months out. At the moment, many price targets that exist on the street are for December of this year. We, along with many others, are putting together our mid-year outlooks at the moment that will see us look through to the summer of next year. And I still think there's upside. I mean, probably less so than we've seen in recent months. But if we were to think about, 5,400, 5,500 on the S&P, over the next 12 months, it's a sort of a range bound to drifting higher, which we think is a constructive environment to be in.
And Grace, what you're so good at is also breaking down sectors.
Yes.
Right. Is this sectors? I know we're expecting Nvidia a little bit later on, which will be, again, the other national obsession.
Yes.
I think we used to joke that it was like Taylor Swift and Nvidia that, props up the U.S. economy. But is it going to be, again, AI? And so is there justification and valuation for the Magnificent Seven, or will it shift?
It's a bit of both. I mean, using Nvidia as an example of the Magnificent Six, I'd call it more broadly.
Because of
the strength of earnings, you've actually seen, despite tremendous share price gains, you've actually seen some of these stocks getting cheaper because the earnings have surpassed expectations. And I think that will continue. 30% earnings growth for the Magnificent Six this year. That will probably become more like 16% next year. But on the flip side, you've also got the broader S&P, the other 493, going from around 6 to 13. So that's telling you that growth in the Magnificent Six, the tech stocks broadly, is still good, very good. But the rest of the market is catching up. So a broadening across sectors and also likely across market caps. And don't forget non-US markets, where we also think earnings are picking up. And there's really good opportunities in Europe, for example.
I have a lot of questions on Europe, but do you worry about the mid-caps in the U.S.? Again, if you have a slowdown, for example, in consumer spending, if the big broad ones can rely on the international markets, what happens to middle America?
So I think if there is a very strong slowdown in consumer spending, then you wouldn't want to be in the mid-caps. But on our assumption that actually growth trends down to around 2%, then mid-cap should see a disproportionate improvement. Again, their earnings profile, if we look at the S&P 400 to represent more mid-cap companies, the earnings profile there is for a decent pick-up to mid-teens earnings growth if you look forward over the next 12 months. So that broadening theme by market cap, sector and geography, I think, will be a really important one.
Oh, Grace, thank you so much. Grace Peters there from JPMorgan Private Bank stays with us for more analysis. We'll actually talk about European and UK valuations. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Welcome back, everyone. Now, still with us, Grace Peters, Global Head of Investment Strategy at JPMorgan Private Bank. Grace, thank you so much for sticking around. We talked about the U.S., we talked about the Fed, we talked about some of the market forces, and, of course, the AI stocks. You say there's still quite a lot of value or actually opportunities in Europe. Again, do you break it down by sector, or is it exposure to international?
Well, for Europe specifically, then I think the international exposure is first and foremost what we're after. There are technology businesses within that. There's also luxury goods companies, consumer companies, mining companies that we think are all pretty interesting in their own right. I do think there's also a domestic European story that's been building over the last few months. It does feel like the worst of the growth shock in Europe is behind us. Inflation is coming down. We think the ECB is going to cut in June, and all of that supports also some of the domestic plays, of which the banks, I think, are the strongest example, because they also are delivering shareholder returns, which is unprecedented. If you think back 10 years ago when the banks were big net issuers. So there's quite a bit to like in Europe.
And the UK, and again, I mean, a lot of these indexes are actually supported by share buybacks or dividends. Do you have concerns that that's great for now, but there's a lack of investment 3, 4, 5 years from now?
No, I mean, when you're thinking about capital allocation, obviously, if there are growth opportunities, you should be spending on that. And so the poster chart for that is really the AI expenditure from the hyperscalers. If we think about, the Amazons, the Meta, the Googles, these businesses collectively, the 4 of them are going to be spending $200 billion, a huge number in 2025. So great avenues for growth, spend on growth. If you don't have those avenues for growth, then returning money to shareholders at a time that your share price feels depressed is also a really sensible strategy. And so in the UK market, I think there's a lot of businesses, particularly in the mining sector as an example, that would fall into that camp, oil and energy more broadly as well. And I think that's, again, offers good opportunities for investors.
Grace, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. That was Grace Peters, a global head of investment strategy at JPMorgan Private Bank. Now, coming up, President Biden slams the International Criminal Court's decision to seek arrest warrants for Israeli leaders over alleged war crimes in Gaza. The latest from the Middle East next, and this is Bloomberg. Well, Bloomberg learns that ASML and TSMC have ways to disable the world's most sophisticated chip-making machines in the event that China invades Taiwan. We'll bring you our scoop. Europe is divided over a request by the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor to issue arrest warrants for the Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu and the country's defense minister on war crime charges. Plus, JPMorgan boss Jamie Dimon ignites succession talk at America's biggest bank, signaling his retirement is closer than ever. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Dell's chief executive says the company is unveiling a new line of personal computers optimized for AI tasks. Now, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow spoke exclusively with Michael Dell alongside Nvidia chief Jensen Huang at the Dell World Conference in Las Vegas.
All our new PCs will be AI PCs, right? And the reason is that anything that you're doing that has an edit prompt is going to be sped up, because every software developer in the world is figuring out how to use all this new power in the GPUs and the NPUs in these new AI PCs.
Neural processing units for the initiated.
So that experience will be better. So when your PC is now 4 years old, it's time for you to get a new one, right? You're going to want the one that speeds up those new capabilities. And inside your company, they're going to want to make sure you have that they don't want to buy a machine that's going to last for several years that doesn't have that capability.
Jensen, where is Nvidia's place in the AI PC? I know you as gaming. That's again, I grew up with the gaming side of Nvidia. Do you have a place in the AI PC market?
Come back next year.
Exactly. There are a bunch of Nvidia GPUs and Dell PCs, and Dell workstations. All of our GPUs have the same tensor cores that are running in H100s in the cloud. And so every one of our GPUs use AI to do its work. AI, of course, is going to transform gaming. All the NPCs, the non-player characters, they're going to be
Think
chatbots.
about development time, how it will be cut, for example.
Creating worlds is going to be easier. Instead of instruction-driven computing, it's now intention-driven computing. So it's easier to write programs. Python programs will be even easier to write. Video conferencing will be a lot better because of it.
But what you did with Blackwell and other products is you innovated by saying, okay, let's combine GPU with CPU. Is that the next iteration for you in AI PC? You go, okay, here's the Nvidia CPU that goes with it.
We want to support every CPU the world makes. And there are places that want x86, we support x86. Yes. There are places that prefer ARM, we support ARM. We just went to ISC, and the top most energy efficient supercomputers in the world are now powered by Grace Hoppers. And so wherever it makes sense, we'll support the right CPUs.
The chief executives of Nvidia and Dell, they're speaking exclusively to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow in Las Vegas. Now, the JPMorgan chief executive, Jamie Dimon, says the bank's succession plans are, quote, well on the way. He says the timetable is not 5 years anymore after he was asked how long he would remain in charge.
I have the energy that I've always had. That's important. I think when I can't put the jersey on and give it full thing, I should leave, basically. The board probably, it's up to them at the time. Will I stay as chairman for a while? We'll see. But I think and we're on the way. I mean, we're moving people around.
Now, for more on this, let's go to Bloomberg's Jenny Serrain. So we were with him actually last week. I mean, he was on fighting form. He was on great form. So that I think when he says, I still have energy, yes, we can vouch for that. If anybody has a meeting with him. But for many years, he was always joking that he was 5 years away from retiring. I mean, it's been 20 years that he's been being 5 years away.
Yes. No, I think that's exactly right. So this was not the first time, but one of the first times where you see him kind of admitting that, his time atop JPMorgan might be coming to a close soon. Still nothing firm, still nothing concrete. Obviously, from your interview last week and then also just from the marathon of their investor day yesterday, you can see that he still has a lot of energy and a lot of excitement about the role. But yes, you see him sort of transitioning that language and kind of acknowledging that this won't be forever. It won't always be kind of the House of Dimon over at JPMorgan.
So, Jenny, who are the main people that we should watch out for as possible successors to Jamie Dimon?
So there's been so many over the years, but right now it sort of seems like it's shaping up to be almost a three-way race. So earlier this year, they did a big management reshuffle. They put two people, Troy Rohrbar and Jennifer Piepzak, in charge of their corporate and investment banking side. And then they've got Marianne Lake, who used to be their CFO, and now she's leading all of consumer. And so you see him really trying to put these really key deputies over businesses that they might not have had experience with in the past, and kind of giving them more and more responsibility and oversight of more and more parts of the business, so that if it does come to pass one day where they might need to be elevated to that top role, that they've kind of seen all sides of the behemoth that is JPMorgan.
I mean, he's a tough act to follow. So, I know partly will be in what kind of business they run, but I don't know whether it's also based on personality.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because it's hard to know how much of it is, he is Jamie Dimon, and so therefore he, is Jamie Dimon, or is it the JPMorgan CEO kind of has to have that personality? And, as the CEO of the biggest bank, do you need to be kind of the loudest voice in the room on all sorts of things, from regulation to Wall Street to, consumer banking to economy? So it'll be interesting because none of the three that you see kind of coming up behind him are really anything like Jamie. But I think there's also a case to be made that you don't have to be Jamie, and that there could be someone else to take over. So,
well, we'll continue being on top of the story. Jenny and her team, of course, working night and day to get the inside scoops. Jennifer Serrain there with the very latest on JPMorgan. Much more to come. This is Bloomberg. U.S. President Joe Biden has defended Israel against war crimes charges sought by the International Criminal Court. Now, the ICC chief prosecutor says he's seeking arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Now, Biden says there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Well, for more on all of this, let's get straight to Fawaz Gerges, the chair and professor of the Contemporary Middle East at the London School of Economics. He's also the author of What Really Went Wrong, The West and the Failure of Democracies in the Middle East, which comes out next week. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, the court has put these charges against the Israeli leader, despite the U.S. saying that it could actually jeopardize the chances of a ceasefire deal. Do you think it delays the deal?
It has nothing to do with the deal. This is an excuse that the United States has used in the past 7 months to undermine the work of international institutions, including the Security Council. The US and the UK have repeatedly claimed that any kind of an immediate ceasefire in the Security Council and any kind of a decision by an international court, whether the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court, will have an impact on what's happening in Gaza. Look what's happening in Gaza. 7 months, a great catastrophic tragedy. The killing continues. The displacement of the Palestinians continues. There is no deal. Israeli Prime Minister, to really summarize it very simply, does not really want a ceasefire, does not really want to end this particular war, because it really would mean the end of his political future. It would collapse his government, and that's why.
Yeah. But Professor, it will have an impact on Netanyahu's psyche, and it will have an impact in what he does in terms of the offensive in Rafah. Would it not be naive to say that they're not linked?
And I think it would be dangerous for both the United States and Israel not to take the decision by the International Criminal Court seriously. But I don't think they are taking it very seriously. I mean, think of what has happened in the past 24 hours in Israel. I mean, blanket attack on the International Criminal Court and on its chair. The United States said, President Biden said, the decision is outrageous. Britain said it's not useful. But the reality, this is really a substantive decision. It's a game changer. The question for your audience is the following. Why should the West and the United States and the UK celebrated an arrest warrant against President Putin when he invaded the Ukraine? And why should the United States and the UK and the West denounce the International Criminal Court when basically trying to hold Israeli leaders and Hamas leaders to the same legal standards? It tells you a great deal about how the world...
There has been a lot of heads of state trying to minimize casualties in Gaza, especially in Rafah, which is immensely urban and immensely dense with civilians and children and women. Do these efforts lead to anything? What is the right way to speak to Israel, to convince the Prime Minister to maybe slow down, to limit casualties? Who's the right person, who's the right country to be able to do that?
Asking really a rational, commonsensical, humane question. I mean, think the entire international community has been asking the Israeli war cabinet not to carry out all-out assault against Rafah. You have 1.3 million displaced people in Rafah. It's a very small city. Yet Israel insists, and Israel is attacking some parts of Rafah as we talk, you and I, and the United States. Look, if you really want me to answer the question very directly, I think it's the decision of the United States. The United States provides the weapons. The United States provides the ammunition. The United States provides the political support. I mean, look, you asked me earlier about the International Criminal Court. Look how President Biden is going out of his way and basically undermining American legal precedents, trying to shield Israeli Prime Minister. At the end of the day, without American leverage, and I'm saying leverage, you have to stop the flow, the provision of ammunition and arms, and you have to accept the decisions by international institutions and stop using U.S. veto in the Security Council in order to prevent the establishment of the Palestinian state. To summarize, I don't think Israel is going to stop its war in Rafah.
Professor, what does the sudden death of the Iranian president mean for stability in the region, given all the proxy wars where Iran is involved?
I don't think the death of the Iranian president will bring about any changes in Iran's regional politics or foreign policy, for the simple reason that the Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, was not the commander-in-chief of Iran. He was not the highest top executive official. It's the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, is the commander-in-chief. He constructs Iranian regional and international politics. There is also a National Security Council in Iran. So even though the death of Ibrahim Raisi represents a major loss for the Iranian decision-making process, I don't think it will have any critical, any substantive, any significant impact on Iran's regional and international politics.
But, Professor, it was my understanding that Raisi's death will have an effect on who replaces the supreme leader, Khamenei, and that the late president was mooted as a possible successor. So if not him, who?
Correct. It will have a major impact on the balance of power within Iran itself. Because, as you said, Ibrahim Raisi was a serious candidate to replace the supreme leader. Now, the loss of Raisi creates a vacuum. In fact, the next elections, presidential elections in Iran in 50 days, is not just about the identity and the character of the new president. It's about the replacement for the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, because Ali Khamenei is 85 years old, he's ill. So that's why there's a great deal of competition, not between reformists and conservatives, but rather between conservatives and ultra-conservatives, because whoever is elected president will most probably become the supreme leader of Iran in the next few years, 5 or 6 or 3 or 4 years.
I was going to ask you whether there's a chance of having more moderate leadership. Do you think it will be conservative or ultra-conservative, though?
I mean, because the reformists have been excluded, have been marginalized, have been really prevented from running for elections in Iran in the past few years. So the ultra-conservatives now are fully in charge. And that's why we need to really focus and pay attention to the presidential elections at the end of June to see what kind of candidate is elected, whether he is a moderate conservative or a hardliner like President Ibrahim Raisi. My take on it, I think you're going to see more of the same. I think the next president will be a similar a similar character with an ideological worldview to the president who just died 2 days ago, Ibrahim Raisi.
Fawaz Gerges, thank you so much for joining us today. That was the chair and professor of contemporary Middle East at the London School of Economics. Now, coming up, actress Scarlett Johansson reveals how she had to push back against OpenAI's new product. We take a look at how artificial imitation has become a hot-button issue in Hollywood and beyond. That's next, and this is Bloomberg. Now, investors standing by for Nvidia earnings tomorrow for the latest gauge on the AI rally. Meanwhile, OpenAI is in the headlines after being criticized by Hollywood star Scarlett Johansson. Now, here to explain is Bloomberg's Alex Webb. Now, Alex, I mean, there are many stories, actually, where Hollywood's really just not happy with OpenAI. This is basically Scarlett Johansson saying, no, you can't use my voice for one of your features. They used a voice that is very close to hers, and I guess she took action.
Yeah, because she says that OpenAI actually contacted her about essentially licensing her voice. She, for undisclosed reasons, but she said she thought about it long and hard, decided not to do that, not to record it and hand it over to them. The interesting thing, of course, is that she voiced the AI assistant in the film, the Spike Jonze film, Her, about a decade ago. And the voice that was ultimately shown at this demonstration seemed to be very similar to the voice in Her, and not least in the sort of syntax, in the way that, I say she, that it interacted with its interlocutor.
But Alex, I mean, this is you know, and we talk about, we have all these stories almost day in, day out about, you know, being able to basically fake your voice, and so, you know, concerns about kidnapping or kids calling their parents where it's not them, asking for money and things like that. And then we also, in the realm of, in the future, this is what the Bumble founder was saying, we don't have to date people, we can have our avatars online, figure out who's the best match.
Well, she talked about it, I think, in the interview that our colleague Emily Chang carried out with her at the Bloomberg Tech Conference, as being a sort of concierge, right? That you'll sort of set your two AIs up, they have a conversation, and they work out your schedule, see if you guys are a potential match, and then you actually meet in person. The thing that's fascinating about that is there is a film with, I think, with Jack Whitehall with sort of very much that premise. Her, of course, is actually kind of mildly dystopian at the end. And it's fascinating that so many of these tech executives, they look to Hollywood, they look to the culture writ large as a touchstone for what they're doing, even though often with these films, the message they're conveying or trying to transmit isn't necessarily a positive one. It is faintly dystopian about how they see the future evolving. So there's a strange sort of disconnect there.
But how do you see it evolving? I mean, again, there's kind of like, we're waiting for Nvidia, which is single-handedly propping up the U.S. economy almost. And those earnings are tomorrow. And then you have these, incredible stories, and I don't know whether they're far-fetched and they're like 2 years away or they're 10 years away.
Well, there's a part of this which is that having spent all this money or spending all this money on Nvidia chips and chipsets, the companies doing so, not least the hyperscalers, the cloud operators, need then to make those pay for themselves by finding a business case for them. They are going to be pushing these in a big way. Particularly, I think the PC makers are really looking for an upgrade cycle right now. PC sales have been slowing. The likes of Dell, Apple, and others are really looking for more.
Alex, thank you so much. Alex Webb there. Never a dull moment when you cover AI. Also never a dull moment when you cover Elon Musk. A coalition of Tesla shareholders urging the rejection of Chief Executive Elon Musk's proposed $56 billion pay package. Now, investors are set to vote on the package at the annual meeting in mid-June. The rebels say that Musk is distracted by his commitments to 5 other companies, preventing him from serving the EV makers' best interests. Now, let's bring in Bloomberg's global autos editor, Craig Trudell. Craig, I have so many questions. First of all, I mean, he is distracted, but is he still doing a good job with Tesla?
I think when you look at this letter and look at it closely, I think they particularly take issue with the performance of the company just in the last few years. And if you look at how the stock price has performed, say since the day that he disclosed taking a stake in Twitter, Tesla is significantly lagging the S&P 500 index. And so did he accomplish really incredible things that were sort of laid out in this pay package, in this award? Absolutely. But has he really sort of shot himself in the foot by the way that he's run the company in the years since he achieved these things? That is also true, and that is what they're taking issue with, and really leveraging the ruling in Delaware that, through this whole pay package, out the window and force the board's hand to try and adjust and offer this back up to investors.
I mean, $56 billion is a lot of money. I mean, I imagine that he'd be pretty angry about being challenged. And so are there consequences from challenging Elon Musk?
I think, he has proactively, even before the Delaware court made its ruling, sort of, made this not so veiled threat that, if he doesn't control 25% of this company, he will take his work on AI and robotics elsewhere. So that is sort of looming over, and you do have, this effort on the part of Tesla to really drum up support among retail investors and some, loud voices on now X, really sort of holding out this potential for, if we don't give Elon this, will he leave? I guess the counter to that, if you ask the Delaware Chancery Court judge, is, hey, this guy still has quite a big stake in this company and very much has a vested interest in seeing the stocks stay, where it is.
So interesting. Craig, thanks so much. As always, our global autos editor, Craig Trudell. Now, up next, Bloomberg Brief, Danny Berger, Manus Cranny in New York, and this is Bloomberg.